You got your artists, they hate them. And below that, the lowest of the low, the scum of their society for merchants.
But what we could be doing is just freeing up our time and having like a better time. Like we could have everything done for us, but we don't do that because we gotta all work till we die. Like I don't get it.
Like it's not the AI's fault that it does what it does or that it has these biases, right? Like it's always a human behind the scene, and we should be holding the people behind it accountable.
Hello and welcome back to Coming In Without Context. This is a podcast hosted by Hope Stolzheimer and Dylan Yang. I am today's guest host, Casey Zhang, and the general premise, if this is your first time watching, is that we're going to start up a conversation about a random topic. Someone's going to leave the room and rejoin the conversation later on down the line, and they're going to have to try to guess what we're talking about. So today, the person who leaves, or I guess he's already gone, is Dylan Yang. So I'm joined here by Hope, and let's just get into it. So maybe just to kick things off here, Hope, how would you define technology?
Oh, okay. I feel like technology is any working improvement on the materials you previously used to do things. I feel like today we view technology just in like the sort of like computers and TVs and all of that, but I feel like even just like a tractor today would be an improvement in technology compared to tractors used like 100 years ago. So I would include that, but I don't know. I've never really thought about the definition of technology.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I think you brought up kind of, the main example, right, of what we see as technology these days as computers. I guess, like, in your view, like, what do you think would have been newfangled, like, high-tech, like, contraptions or inventions back in the 1700s or, like, 1800s?
Okay, I really gotta put my brain into history for a second here. In the 1700s, I feel like the newfangled thing, really know. I guess like any sort of improvement in medicine is what's coming to mind because people are just like always dying. So I feel like any sort of like new innovation in medicine, I don't know specifically what those are, would probably be the like most cutting edge improvements in technology in those eras.
No, I don't blame you. I kind of sprung that on you. Yeah, so I guess like what I kind of want to get at, with the context of, like you said, technology changes over time in terms of the definition, in terms of what people think technology is. But I think the fundamental question I kind of want to tackle today is, what is the cost of technological progress? I think today, as we see technology, it's things like in terms of hardware and software, right? Things that relate to electronics, hardware, it's stuff like computers, iPhones, smartphones in general, I don't know, satellites, cameras, stuff like that. And then on the software side, you have stuff like artificial intelligence and machine learning, right? For example. And, technology has always changed, humanity is still around. Who knows how long we'll survive with the movement of technological progress. But like, what do you think, generally speaking, are the costs of technological progress, if there are any?
Well, I guess in the modern day, I would say the largest cost is environmental. Like especially the Industrial Revolution and how it expanded was like based on fossil fuels and coal. And we still use a lot of those to generate the electricity we use for like all of these modern products and just like for production in general of like almost anything. And so I feel like that's the largest cost has been environmental, even just like mowing down spaces for cities or cutting through ecosystems for different things. Secondarily, I feel like mental and physical health, as we've kind of changed from more agriculturally based societies to like what economies are today, there's a lot of more sedentary lifestyles. And so I feel like those are like the two largest costs of technological innovation. Though I guess the kind of caveat there is that innovation includes all the medical advancements that I was talking about before. So perhaps the physical health has improved overall, especially as we've learned about like nutrition and like how to counter different diseases that we don't really have to worry about nowadays with vaccinations and things like that. So maybe less so, but I don't think people are necessarily healthy today, as like we have different problems than we did then with obesity rising and things like that from being so stationary and from the food you're eating being so far from what was produced.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, right? And something else I think you might have alluded to is the like the loneliness epidemic, right? That we start to experience with technology, where ironically, as people become more connected, people feel more and more distance from other people. And I guess in some ways it's literally manifested itself in, you know, perhaps like lower birth rates or declining birth rates in places like South Korea, Japan, some Scandinavian countries as well. So I think that's interesting. What do you think is the cause of that? Do you think it's just technological progress, you know, acting as it should? Do you think there's like bad faith actors that are taking advantage of technology? Like, do you see technology in itself, or I guess technological progress, as a tool or an actor?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. I would probably say technological progress itself is a tool rather than an actor. But like you mentioned, like there's a lot of bad actors who are using it. But I mean, I would still say it in and of itself is not a bad thing. Like just improving the technology you have is not a bad thing.
I see. So with regards to that, then, what would you say is the, I guess, like the platonic ideal of technological progress? Like, if things go as, you know, they should in the best ways possible, right? In a way that's morally right, that's positive, that's net positive for humanity. Like, what do you think is like the end outcome of the future? Like, if we think about humanity 4,000 or 5,000 years from now, let's say we've conquered all the stars, let's say we've solved all the major scientific questions left in the world. What does that end outcome look like?
Well, what I'd want it to be is we all just have fun and we let the robots do everything for us. We don't have to do mundane tasks because there's some sort of AI that can handle it. And we can just pursue arts and music and have parties and do drugs or whatever else. Like just literally have fun. Because I feel like obviously I don't think that's the direction that we'd go in with technological advancement. I feel like something I saw recently online was like someone talking about like, why are we using AI to try and mimic art and literature and go for these creative pursuits when we could use it for all these purposes that people don't really want to do. Like we've automated so many jobs that people don't want to do, and always there's like cries like, oh, that's taking jobs away, but they're not really jobs people really wanted. But then we have all these like things that I feel like only people can really do to the best degree, and we're trying to get AI to mimic it. And it's like, why this and not that? And I feel like we're always trying to increase productivity and efficiency, but what we could be doing is just freeing up our time and having like a better time. Like we can have everything done for us, but we don't do that because we gotta all work till we die. Like I don't get it. And I don't think that's what you were looking for as your answer, but that's what I hope technological advances do for us, is that we don't die of diseases. We can all live happy, healthy lives and just like actually enjoy life and the people around us, because I feel like technology can be used to take a lot of burdens away, and that's not what it's being used for now.
Yeah. Well, I will say, Hope, you're not necessarily living up to your first name with the "work until we die" prediction. No, but I think that's interesting. I feel like there's a lot of different perspectives people can take on that. But back to your point about art, for example, right? AI used for art, generative AI, has a huge range of applications, right? It could be from stuff like you want to cheat on your homework, right? It can help you with that. You want to create music and create that, writing, stuff like that. Well, what are your thoughts on that, right? I know, prior in another podcast, you mentioned how someone created a children's book fully using AI, right? Do you think that's something that is going to push forward creative innovation, or do you think it's something that's kind of stymie it instead?
I don't think it's gonna push forward creative innovation. Personally, I think it could be used for those intents. Like I saw today actually that like the MoMA has an exhibit, or not necessarily an exhibit, but a piece that was supposed to be like AI's conscience or something like that. And they just fed AI like every piece they've ever had in their collection. And it just like looked like a weird moving blob that changed and was supposed to symbolize something. And I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. But for the most part, I think like AI trying to mimic like an artist or writer's job, ultimately, like I don't see the purpose, because I think even in the last episode we discussed like there's always a moral or message to a story, and I don't think AI necessarily picks up the right messages because they're exposed and there's biases in who like creates the AI and those sorts of things, like who programmed it and what it's being fed, that I just don't necessarily trust. And it's harder to really see the transparency in what it's being fed or no, because it could be like everything. Like you can't necessarily limit it. So I don't think it's going to push it forward, but I do think it could be used for those sorts of purposes, like if intentionally done, rather than like, I want to publish a book, but I don't want to write it, so I'm just going to feed it into an AI generator. And it's really interesting because I was a tutor for the multilingual writing center at my college, and we had to do like these trainings and they were trying to teach us how to spot if a student in a foreign language class was using like Google Translate or AI generators. And so literally like the head of the center like pulled up like a new AI and she like fed it a prompt and said, write it in French and Spanish. And it just like 10 seconds, it wrote a whole paragraph, first in French and then in Spanish, just like a creative prompt. Like you didn't even need to write the English. And it was a little insane for all of us, and people could spot that there were like grammar mistakes and stuff, but it was really hard to tell if it was made by an AI or a student. And so it was like kind of concerning for that sort of purpose, that people don't really need to learn the language at all to still submit full paragraphs and things like that. But yeah, I don't know. I kind of rambled on for a bit there. So you want to reel me in?
Yeah. I'll reel you into to an earlier point I think you were making around how generative AI might not be positive, right, when it comes to creative expression. What would you say to the fact that people have made similar statements or opinions on things like photography in the past, right? Where when pictures, cameras started becoming more commonplace, we're saying, well, this takes away all the creative expression of art, right? Because suddenly you don't need to get very good at sculpting or drawing to get a hyper realistic or one-to-one depiction of someone. You can just get a camera to do it. But then I think what we've seen these days is more that photography in itself exists not only in terms of not only as a utility, right? Like you pull up your smartphone, you take a picture or something, post it, be real, Instagram, etc., but also as a way to express yourself through photography. What would you say to that? Like if that was like the counterpoint to the idea that AI isn't going to be something that helps creative thought.
Yeah, I feel like that's a really interesting comparison, because obviously like photography is so widely accessible to people, yet you're not going to see like your neighbor's photos up in a museum, because I feel like it has to be very intentional what's being done with the photography to be viewed as like, you have to be really intentional with what you're doing for it to be considered like art, I guess, like quote unquote art. And a lot of that has to do with like the message behind the image or like how you do it. And the introduction of photography especially transformed the more traditional arts of like painting, especially because now we see a lot less realist paintings. We might see like a hyper realist painting in a museum, but you're not going to see the same sorts of works as you did before. Like modern art is so completely different from the art that was produced before the introduction of the camera that it really changed how things were done. And for AI, I am curious to see if that happens, because I know like I saw that sort of counterpoint like being said like online, where people were posting like paintings and stuff saying like no to AI art, and they were like intentionally drawing like the AI and then putting like a cross through it or something like that, and someone was like, see, AI is already changing art, and then everyone was like, boo, like that's not what the point of these is. So I am curious to see if it does have a way of changing art, but I don't think it'll be to the same way that the introduction of photography changed art. Because I feel like a lot of artists have been so angry at AI, and I don't know how angry artists were about photography, but I doubt it was in the same way as they are angry at AI art, because for the most part, AI art is stealing the work of other artists and like using their pieces to create its own, whereas photography was still original work. So I feel like that's the main difference. But I don't know, Dylan, do you have a viewpoint on anything I said?
So this is gonna get real philosophical real quick up in here. I'm
man.
going to my instinct as a philosopher is to play devil's advocate for the AI. And one of the things you said was about intent, and it's hard to discuss things like art and like works of literature when discussing intent, because sometimes it's accidental. Like, do you ever control every thought you have? Like when you're struck by inspiration, is that intentional? I get what you're trying to say, but I as the number one bot defender for this podcast, I feel like you could argue the same way that in how artists intentionally create art or put effort into their art, AI also intends to create that art. And obviously, I think we conceive of it differently because the AI is not sentient, but also is being controlled by people. And so that brings me to think that it's not that we're angry that your artistic style is being copied, or that like it's replicating your color scheme or whatever. I'm not an art person really. Because like throughout history, people have always sought to copy and replicate the masters, right? Like that's why there are movements of art. Like if one person was doing just their own style, it wouldn't be a movement. It's only a movement because the artists after them, inspired by them, sought to like either improve, innovate, or like replicate their style.
It's like the Picasso quote, right? It's like good artists copy, great artists steal, something like that.
Yeah. So then in the same way, I feel like AI, we're not angry, or at least I don't think we should be angry at AI for copying. I think the reason we're hurt by it is, or artists are hurt by it, is because it does it so effortlessly, right? It does it in mere seconds without any consideration, in the same way humans have to like put in effort, buy the material, spend hours of their day planning and drawing and practicing, et cetera, right? This AI is doing it. What it takes us hours and days and months to do, it does it in seconds. And I think the effort is what we're angry at. And
I disagree.
That could be justified. I don't really know. I can't really say. But
why do you disagree, Hope?
If you look at any of the fine details in like any AI art, they're always off. Like if you look from a distance, it looks the same. But then if you look at anything specifically, and if any of those fine details are right, it means it like really copied a piece. Like it didn't draw from multiple materials. It drew from like one. So I feel like it's not the fact that it's effortless that really annoys artists. It's the fact that it's getting all this recognition and it's going to be cheaper than artists while still not actually getting like the fine details right or anything like that. Like it's going to be the cheaper solution despite stealing from their art. without even doing it right. Like, I feel like that's what the infuriating thing is. Stealing from the art, not properly producing it, but still going to be the cheaper alternative that they know a lot of businesses are going to turn to.
Yeah, that's interesting. Dylan, something that I asked Hope earlier that I think ties into your point was I asked her, do you see technology as an actor or a tool? And it sounds like you see technology more like a tool, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's interesting. I feel like the idea of stealing, I think, is a loaded question, I think, for a lot of folks that work in AI. I've done some work in the space, and I think the argument some of the folks would make is that if you feed a bunch of images, let's say you feed into a model 10,000, high resolution images of a horse, right? And then you ask the model, create a picture of a horse for me, right? And if that looks similar to someone else's picture of a horse, they might claim that's stealing, right? But then you can have a similar situation with a human, right? Where they look through a bunch of different photo books and see a bunch of pictures of horses that are super realistic, and then they create their own picture of a horse, right? And that's super realistic. Is that still stealing if something else was made similarly before in the past? Or is it seen as different now that, it's technology doing it? It's not a human. Just like as a general question.
I think that connects back to what Hope was saying about photography, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think like there was a few years ago, there was that legal controversy about the photographer owning the rights of their photos, even if the photos are of other people. I think it was of Ariana Grande specifically, right? She posted professional photos of herself on her Instagram, and she got sued by the photographer because she didn't pay for like the license or rights to those photos, even though they're of her. And the photographer won in court, I'm pretty sure. And so I think this stems from our conceptions of ownership. Like, we so desperately want to have ownership over something, anything, and everything, right? Like, that's what capitalism is. It's about ownership. So that leads us to obviously, and perhaps rightfully, protect what we create. Like, as a creative, I definitely would feel offended and stolen from if someone like took my idea and like pitched it as their own. But then it gets kind of murky when you talk about like what we have, like how things look in real life, right? Like, do you own your own image? Do you own how you look every second of every day? And like, even if you change it, do you suddenly get ownership of that new look of yours?
I think I get your point here. And to the point, do you own your likeness? Well, copyright is implicit. Or I guess like if pictures are being taken of you in public space, you obviously don't own them, right? But I think copyright is something that doesn't necessarily have to be explicitly stated for it to be owned. But a larger point that I'm curious about is, Hope, something you were getting to was how, with this tool becoming easier and easier to get the little details done, people might lose their jobs, right? Or like, because it's done more cheaply, more quickly, more efficiently, as a result, because of capitalism, right? We want to lower costs, increase revenue, increase output. Therefore, people will lose their jobs. I think one part to that, I think one initial reaction I have is I feel like there have been similar concerns about technological advancement in the past, right? Where ATMs came into play in the late 60s and people thought, well, suddenly there's not going to be any more bank tellers, right? But then bank tellers actually exploded in terms of employment. The number went up for, I think, the next 2-3 decades. Or how, the advent of the telephone took away jobs from telegram operators. And then the advent of more efficient electrical lines took away the jobs of telephone operators, in the 1960s and 70s. I feel like a general question that I want to pose to both of you is, do you think technology, this newest round of technology, stuff like artificial intelligence and machine learning, do you think it's a net negative for society, or do you think it's something that's a little bit more murky?
I feel like this kind of connects to something I said earlier, where I feel like when it comes to creative pursuits, I would rather a human do them. And when it comes to things that could be done by automation and like doesn't really require like critical thinking or creative thinking, I would be fine with an AI doing that, because it, in the end, in those sorts of scenarios, it doesn't really have implications if a human does it or not. But the thing with like art and storytelling and things like that, is like I don't necessarily trust a random like AI somewhere just writing or producing the same sort of level as I would expect a human to do. And I feel like for like telephone operators, I guess we lose the human connection, but the things we gain are like privacy. Like someone's not knowing exactly who we're calling when we're calling. Like that can't be gossiped about. But like when it comes to like AI producing art, I don't really see necessarily what the gain is for people overall, other than it being cheaper, which I don't think for art especially should be the consideration, because I don't think art needs to be attached to like, oh, it's cheaper, so that's what we'll go with. I don't know, but that's just because of how I feel about art specifically versus like a telephone operator. But obviously I didn't exist when telephone operators were a thing to have that same sort of connection.
I think it depends on the application, right? Because I think one of the most interesting use cases for generative AI that I've seen is by some companies. One of them is called Runway Machine Learning, and they're using it for video edit, right? Where I think video editing is something that is deeply creative, right, at its heart. But then there's also a lot of manual stuff there where it's like, I have to, let's say, change the color of this background image, or I have to change this one object into another object because I'm working on a TV show. We don't want to show that brand, for example. And that's, tens of hours of time per task that now can be completely automated with AI. But I feel like at that point, it's kind of like, it's kind of like splitting hairs. I think something else that came to mind, like, do you think there's different levels of value depending on different types of work, right? Because you mentioned work that's manual can be automated away, and you're fine with that. But then work that you believe is more creative should be left to humans.
Personally, I don't think there's like an inherent value in certain types of work versus others. However, I do think there's work that is perhaps more fulfilling. I mean, I'm sure everyone can be fulfilled by different things in their life, but like, for example, like working on a factory line where you're eventually gonna get like arthritis in your hands because you're doing the same thing over and over and over again. I don't think we necessarily need a human to be doing that. And I don't think anyone's being fulfilled by like attaching a wheel to a bike. Like that's what their job has always been. And like, that's what gets them going. I think if they were producing like the whole bike, maybe they'd be a little more excited. But in those sorts of jobs, like I understand a lot of people's livelihoods are attached to a lot of different jobs, and automation can really affect that. But at the end of the day, I think if we can replace those jobs with something more fulfilling, or I mean, I believe that there are certain like human rights that should be like baseline fulfilled. If we can do that and don't need people to do these sorts of jobs that are not really contributing much because like a robot could do it, I would have those replaced over something where like you can receive fulfillment and you can receive enjoyment from the job, where like you're producing something in a different way than just like attaching a wheel to a bike, like if I stick with that. But obviously I don't know how that would work. And I don't want to say like some jobs have more value than others, because I don't believe that. But there are definitely jobs that I think people, if given the opportunity, would probably try to leave. And I think in those instances, we could probably switch over who does those sorts of jobs.
I want to push back on what Hope said earlier. And I feel like your opinions are probably the majority, so I'm in the minority, if anything. But like, I was thinking about your point about artists, like going back a little bit. I watched a Vox video about these. If you go into basically any European town, like right now, today, and you can find in the touristy spots artists, replica artists, who will draw you famous artworks, detail for detail, all nearly perfectly. And like even the top art analyzers who like try and view fakes from real ones, they cannot figure it out without the use of technology. Like you have to use an AI that's trained to find microscopic differences in the brushstrokes in order to tell the real one apart from the fake one. And I feel like I don't know if that changes how you view the role of AI doing something similar, where they're not okay, well now I've I've tricked myself into a different train of thought about NFTs and just copying things. Like if you take a digital image and you take a screenshot of it, that's basically copying the same thing, the original, like exactly identically, right? I've lost my train of thought.
I think yeah, I think NFTs are definitely a little bit different.
Okay. But sorry. Going to the second point. I also question how we view, like going to Casey, your prompt about like how we value different work, like different occupations, and how I feel like society tends to view creative endeavors as more inherently valuable in some way compared to more mechanical things. And I wonder if we just are pushing it back against AI because we don't trust in their results just yet. And this, like Hope specifically said the word trust, which made me think about this. It's that like there's a lot of the backlash towards the art AI right now is that, oh, it's not exactly perfect, right? Oh, look, there's this tiny mistake and there's this tiny mistake and this blah, blah, blah. But in a year, those mistakes aren't going to exist anymore, right? Like the AI is going to learn from itself, just like all previous AIs have, just like the chess AI has, just like, I don't know what other AIs are there.
Well, that's the interesting part, Dylan. I don't think it's going to be that easy because we haven't reached the state with our capabilities where AI is able to identify its own biases and correct them. That's all manually done.
By people. I think people are going to do that, right? Like I don't think the people who behind AIs, maybe you included, Casey, are going to just take this lying down and be like, oh, all of the internet is reacting poorly and pointing out all these mistakes. Okay, well then the next step is that I'm going to make it better so that they don't even realize.
For me, when you talked about trust specifically, it's not that I don't trust because it's making those mistakes. The thing with an artist is it's a single artist, or maybe like if they collaborate on a piece, like you can see the list of names of the artists and you can kind of find out what those person's biases are. But when it comes to an AI application, you don't know who was behind the programming or what images it was necessarily fed in the same way. Like the biases are more hidden, even though they're still there. Like obviously everything that's ever created has been created with a certain bias, but it's more transparent when it's a person making the piece versus artificial intelligence.
But then that makes me want to ask you if you think we should separate the art from the artist. And if we should not separate, like if they have to be tied together because of these biases, then is it also like the logical next step that we also have to punish all of the artists who made great works, and we have to stop listening to those great works? Like we have to just get rid of them, you know? Like,
sorry, what's your question?
Do you think that we should tie art to the artist?
I think it's impossible not to.
Well, yeah, and then so then the next question is, whenever an artist has made a mistake, like human error or worse things, does that mean we have to cancel and like remove all traces of their art from society?
No, it's just you have to view that art knowing the biases, but that's much harder to do when you're viewing AI art where you don't know the biases. Like
how is it harder to view the biases in AI art?
Because I feel like I think for the most part, you don't really know. For me personally, I don't know who created the art or like what images it was fed. And I don't think the majority of people would have necessarily like the literacy to interpret the image and try and understand. Like, I think this is more of a problem. I haven't seen it as much in AI art, but I've heard stories for a lot of other programming where it's like, oh, the hand sanitizer doesn't work if you're not white, or like the different things like that, or like every time an image is posted on, if you generate an image, I think it was they would change like the face of a Black person to like a white person when they tried to make it like an anime face, or like an Asian person when they tried to make it an anime face every time. And so like those sorts of things aren't necessarily intentional, but they do still bias the algorithm in a way that it's harder to necessarily see until it affects someone specifically. Like, I feel like that's what's more difficult about it. I don't know.
Isn't that the same as normal art then, where you see the bias in the output?
Yes. But the thing is, like, it's easier to recognize if it's like a single person doing it. It's harder to like change or reconcile if like there's this huge movement for artificial intelligence, and it's not just like one group doing it, like one person or one company or like one organization. And so then like it's going to be very difficult to see like what is causing these biases and like to try and counter them. And I know a lot of these are going to have to happen like internally in whoever's creating the artificial intelligence, but I don't necessarily trust a corporation to correctly handle like its own biases until it's already starting to affect people. Whereas like specifically for like an artist, there can be backlash to that one single person, and maybe people stop supporting them or like something happens, but that's a lot harder to do with an entity creating art that is like separate. Like, I don't know if I'm making sense.
I think I agree with your point, but I feel like the point is not relevant to AI anymore, because it's not like your point isn't an attack against AI. It's now an attack against humans and how we've structured capitalism and corporations. Like, it's not the AI's fault that it does what it does or that it has these biases, right? Like, it's always a human behind the scene, and you obviously recognize that.
Yeah.
But so then like we should be holding the people behind it accountable, right?
Yeah, but that's why I said this was relating to the trust point, where I trust AI less because I don't know the same. I don't have the transparency.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, it's nothing to do with the trusting the AI. Your problem is that you don't trust humans to use the AI in decent, morally good ways.
But
so your problem again is not like it's like you're. I think a plausible equivalent or analogy would be like, if you give weapons to someone, it's not that you don't trust the weapons, it's that you don't trust the people you're giving the weapons to use them in a safe or responsible way. That's like, and this goes back to like what Casey asked, that I'm viewing AI as a tool here, right? Like, I'm viewing weapons as a tool, I'm viewing technology as a tool.
But I think for me, I think there should also be more restrictions on things like weapons. And so I guess what I should go for is like, I think there should be more restrictions on artificial intelligence, so there's accountability like outside of the internal accountability of those sorts of organizations, I guess, is what I should go for.
Yeah. On that point, Hope, do you think not speaking in the normative sense, but like more realistically, what's your opinion on AI then? Do you think it's something that do you think these challenges around bias, around lack of oversight, do you think these are surmountable or insurmountable?
That's a hard question to answer, just because I don't think bias can ever be eliminated just in any sense, like of any person or any product or like.
Right. Maybe a better way to word it is, do you believe that organizations will take responsible steps towards addressing it?
From my own viewpoint, not unless they're forced to. But that is just how I view things. Like, that's a very like my opinion sort of thing.
I hold the same opinion.
It's totally fair. It's totally fair. I think I'm of the same mind as well. And then just as like an aside before we move on, I think it's interesting, Hope, that your perspective is that we should, free up time for people to do things that are more fulfilling. And I think the natural state that you got to there was more creative stuff. I think I agree there, but I think it's just funny putting that into the greater like perspective of history. I think in the past it was like 1500s, 1600s, like Asian culture, like in Japan. I remember like learning about how artists and merchants are like at the bottom of the social hierarchy. It's like at the top you have the emperor, right, who is the embodiment of like the sun god or whatever. And below that you have like your daimyos, and you have your shoguns, your samurai, and you have your peasants, right, your farmers. And then below that you got your artists. They hate them. And below that, the lowest of the low, the scum of their society were merchants.
Yeah. Well, the reasoning was because merchants and artisans profit off of other people's labor.
Yep. Yeah. I thought that was funny. I mean, it's ironic, right, that they're the lowest because they profit off of other people's labor, but then at the same time, it's a feudal state. But then I think the conversation that we've had so far has been around the idea of, AI technology as a tool rather than an actor. But as we move into the future, I think there's a non-zero chance, right, where maybe general artificial intelligence is discovered then, right? Like we crack the code, and people don't put any limiters or things like that on it. Do you think in a future where artificial intelligence is an actor, right, a rational sentient actor of its own, do you think that's going to be, do you think that will act as like an inflection point towards like utopia for humans or dystopia? Question to both of you.
My hope would be utopia, but I doubt it. Just like if we remain in the sort of political, social, economic systems, especially like in the US, actually no, basically anywhere that we have, I don't think it would be a utopia. But that, like, it could be used for that sort of purpose. Like, I think there's definitely the potential for it to be used to make lives better, but I don't know if it will be.
I think it's not a question about whether it'll turn society into a utopia or dystopia. It's a question of, will humans destroy ourselves before we improve? Like, will we wipe out the human race, or will we manage to survive our own destruction? Like, I think I without a doubt, I think that both bad things and good things will come of this. And overall, in the long term, I feel like our lives will be on the whole better for it. And I think that's been true for our technological advancement, like throughout our short history on Earth. But like at some point, our technology is going to be so destructive that we're going to make a tiny mistake and it's going to wipe everyone out. And I think that's where it's going to end. It's just a question of when that's going to happen, if it's going to be AI or if it's going to be the thing that comes after that.
I see. Okay. Then final question. I think I have a feeling of both of your answers already, but are you optimistic about the future?
No.
Yes, I'm optimistic.
I think I'm optimistic too. Cautiously. Awesome. Well, in terms of the outro, Dylan, what do you think we were talking about? What do you think was the topic?
I think the topic was on AI and if it's good thing or bad thing.
Yeah, I think you definitely got part of it there. I think the fundamental question that I had for this was, what is the cost of technological progress? And then obviously AI is top of mind, so we spent time talking about that. So you're on point.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, do I need to thank any sponsors on the way out?
No. You can beg for sponsors on our behalf.
Thank you, all the sponsors, and yeah, I guess tune in next time where we'll talk about more things without context.
But I'm just gonna physically walk away from my computer. So I'm gonna go AFK. I'm literally going AFK.
Okay, so honor code. No, you're gonna just like be lurking right next to your computer, not saying anything,
No,
and
we're
you're just gonna completely like pretend that you
trust.
recognize.
All right,
Okay.
I'm walking away now.
Wait, not okay. So you already gone?